Well, it's happening again. Just like in 2016, the best worst-selling game of the year is Hitman. Hitman 2 2018, not to be confused with Hitman 2 2002, would be more appropriately named as a Hitman 2016 Season 2 or a Hitman 2016 Volume 2, because what seems to be planned as a timely continuation of episodic levels continuing where Hitman 2016 left off got repackaged and re-released all at once as a sequel thing during a change of publishers, and apparently the game's naming and marketing is still confusing enough to not sell it well to normal people, and us fellow gamer nerd people are up in enough arms over its always online scheme and confusing pricing tiers, and they're not gobbling it up either. Which is a damn shame. One of the great shames of this generation, because Hitman deserves so much better. It is depressingly easy to imagine a slightly different history in which this game could have been selling like hotcakes. I mean, Hitman's a vintage brand. It was borderline mainstream. They made a movie out of it. I know Absolution was kind of poorly received, but there's never really been an out-and-out bad Hitman game. Okay, well, to start explaining myself here, you know what channel you're watching, right? I'm a Metal Gear guy, and that means that Hitman is so far up my alley, so compatible, and so perfectly pandering to my own particular taste that there is no way I wouldn't love it. It's inheriting a lot of the appeal that made Metal Gear Solid cool. This is a campy, laugh-out-loud, funny stealth game brimming with personality and mischief and those rare moments of you just looking at the screen and shouting, "Holy crap, they thought of everything!"
Hey, can you do me a favor? Go check if my keys are over there. Oh man, you're a real lifesaver, thank you.
But unlike the latest Metal Gears, Hitman is still elegant. It's a game whose mechanics and controls are limited enough to fully and faithfully explore the secret agent fantasy. And it's mature enough to know what a childish fantasy that is, so it does it with humor and self-awareness, and that is just good, clean fun. With the completion of the story started in Hitman 2016, Hitman 2 has now also created a complex alternate universe of conspiracy theory plots meant to be replayed again and again to be understood and even deciphered. But more so than anything else, it's a game with ingenious level design, starting in the very first moments of beautifully placed focal points during tutorials to the complicated layers of clockwork scripts and AIs that are engineered into the later levels. And for Hitman 2, we have another pack of some of the best levels in the series, iterating, improving, and even cramming in more homages to Blood Money than the previous pack of levels they made for Hitman 2016. I think in the last review I mentioned that across the whole series, Hitman's party levels are the stuff of legends, and the developers apparently listened. Because this time, every level in Hitman 2 is a party level. Okay, well the first half of the first one is kind of a tutorial obstacle course, but I don't know how much I want to count that one.
Good aim.
Point is, from there on out, you're working with layered cakes of circular facilities broken up into slices of public and private areas. And continuing with the Blood Money homages are sections with funeral scenes and homicidal costume burbs and a suburb full of secrets. And each of these levels has a crowd somewhere, full of partying civilian NPCs who give each mission a sense of stakes, place, personality, environmental storytelling, and most importantly, danger and challenge. Those crowds and their associated levels of security clearances create a lot of interesting problems for you to solve. To help explain why I think these levels are so gosh darn brilliant, I'm going to break them down into 3 supporting pillars, all of which I felt were better in Hitman 2. Crowd tension, gameplay diversity, and alternate routes. The dynamic at play to all these levels here is that no matter where you really go and what your route is, there is going to be a sense of danger, partially propped up by those party crowds. There's a constant sense that you don't belong, the knowledge that there's few spots without some kind of sightlines on you from someone somewhere in a crowd. While a crowd can be good cover, accidentally shoving into just one too many people as you work your way through might well possibly raise enough eyebrows to require you to break away, relocate to a different area, and rethink your strategy. It's dynamic. The crowded streets of Mumbai afford ample crowd cover and vertical visibility if you keep your act straight, but they play like a fundamentally different level than the train yards of Mumbai just a couple blocks over, which has corridors of limited visibility and patrolling armed guards, more like a traditional stealth game. 2 targets patrol these 2 different zones requiring 2 different flavors of stealth strategy, unless you decide to create a more accidental kill and end up doing more of an adventure game puzzle sort of thing to create an accident. Hitman's levels aren't just visually diverse, they're filled to the brim with diverse styles of gameplay. Those accidental kill puzzles were the most enjoyable routes I played through for my first run. They'll occasionally have you sneak away and make use of a completely respectable stealth system of cleanly telegraphed guard AI, ample hiding spots, and delicious options for distraction items and non-lethal takedowns. And if all that goes wrong, hell, even the gunplay in Hitman plays pretty darn good too. but giving you options to keep from resorting to that conclusion is a fluid sense of movement. Despite the danger and the tension, and despite the stiff animations themselves, there's always a sense that a smooth, clean getaway is always possible. There's alternate routes everywhere. The level designers of Deus Ex should take note here. It feels like there are very few windows you can't climb through, very few gutters you can't climb up to suddenly find yourself scaling sheer castle walls. Also new to Hitman 2 is a more iconic representation of your visibility. Foliage and crowds now render you invisible, which does take a step towards softening the difficulty, as does a more forgiving whistling stealth ring that has guards about one notch more blind than I remember. Thing is, those two quality of life features that create a more forgiving sense of difficulty ended up folding into new strategies. Crowd invisibility just gives you more of an incentive to not spook anyone in the crowd, and being able to preview the danger of a guard's sightlines before committing to it just ended up keeping me from save scumming as horribly as I usually do, while still ultimately ending up with me taking the same routes I would have otherwise. Creating a new gameplay style that had me gathering intel and executing on plans, rather than figuring it all out by trial and error as I went. As a game of social stealth and blending into the crowds of fancy parties and exotic tourist traps, Hitman doesn't just evoke the James Bond fantasy better than the Bond games themselves, but it also evokes some much more, relatable stealth fantasies too. For a game full of gruesome murder, it loves depicting what may be the most petty fantasies a big expensive video game ever bothers simulating. Like sneaking back to the kitchen for more sauce, leaving all the sinks on at your asshole neighbor's house and skedaddling out of there. Who doesn't just look at a VIP area and start wondering how hard it would be to lie your way in there? Hitman is fantasy fulfillment on so many levels. I mean, who cares about being the world's greatest genetically engineered super assassin or whatever when I can finally play a video game about walking behind the counter of a restaurant and taking care of my order my own damn self, thank you very much? Turns out that a lot can be done to make a stealth game feel immersive and have levels feel believable and relatable by making so much of your beat-to-beat gameplay be petty mischief. The cleanest assassinations play out like YouTube pranks gone terribly wrong. The path to a single charge of manslaughter is apparently paved by harmlessly annoying some hilariously blind and death stealth game guards, setting up the punchlines for Agent 47's stellar voice and dialogue work to create one of the greatest acts of deadpan pop culture comedy, right up there with Hank Hill and Harry Plinkett.
Not for now. For now, focus on your business and what you do best, friend. That is all.
I will do that.
One false move, and I'm dead.
I think you're right about that, sir.
Agent 47 is a deadpan character just as well adapted to his medium as they are. Because Hitman 2 is just sublime video game comedy. The kind of comedy that only happens when a straight-faced serious presentation somehow turns into the Three Stooges once the player starts pressing buttons. Turns out a lot can also be done to make a game feel rewarding and immersive by making comedy and narrative their own rewards. Every one of 47's lines is a treat, and by playing as a master of disguise as the player's avatar, the game gives players a compelling reason to want to talk their way through these situations rather than blast their way through. And the situations the developers throw this character into show a sense of humor and creative energy that is downright refreshing. They know what to do with Agent 47. They are aware of just how obvious he would stick out from a crowd. They know the joke. They are laughing with you, and they seem to have had a lot of fun coming up with ways to get you giggling. And playing through these hilarious situations again and again is a treat like no other. Without an episodic release schedule, the developers now felt the need to clarify via pop-up message that Hitman's levels are meant to be replayed again and again, and opportunities have been renamed to mission stories, prodding new players on to discovering just how many subplots and alternate areas are going on in levels they may have missed. Those mission stories are what set up accidental kills. You can either learn the level and figure out those puzzle pieces yourself, or have some kind of an in-game strategy guide walk you through them. And once again, though I do recommend turning a lot of that off to take your eyes off waypoint markers and appreciate the scenery around them, I'm not really offended. Thanks to just how customizable your own setup of those helper features can be. I ended up settling on mission stories being more of a minimal hint system than the waypoint marked in-game strategy guide they may well have been before, but even with the waypoint helpers, I did notice some moments where the waypoints turn off and the developers decide they want you to run off to a convenience store and buy some glue or something on your own terms using your noodle rather than following waypoint markers there. One request. I just wish there was one more option for a hard mode, something between the professional and master difficulties, or between the full and minimal options for those HUD helpers. But what we have is still enough for indulging an unhealthy amount of time into my hobby of self-imposed stealth game challenges. Because when it came time to replay, difficulty got bumped up, those HUD helpers got turned off, and a new playstyle developed that I don't think I really got into last time. A kind of roguelite-esque one-life-only run on the master difficulty mode, whereas last time I'd be save-scumming my way to perfectly ghosted silent assassin suit-only runs, this time I ended up having more fun committing to my screw-ups and mistakes on the harder modes, which breaks up the action with short combat and search phases that count down back to normal, just like in Metal Gear. Oh, seriously, this is such a game for me. I think I may be having a game of the generation good time here. It gets me smiling, it gets me giggling, and I am relishing this opportunity to gush about a game that I love that needs more exposure. As disappointing as it is that this stuff doesn't sell well, it's incredibly relieving to see that it got to be made at all, and it was executed so well regardless of its troubles. The wealth of content that either of the two Hitmans needed to stand on its own is now here, combining Hitman 2016's levels with Hitman 2 into one really long level select screen happens if you own the first game or the associated DLC upgrade. It also opens up the opportunity for a grand tour of playing through the whole story over again with the pacing improved enough for that story to actually make sense. I guess you gotta differentiate between idea and execution here. Hitman's self-awareness on the societal consequences of offering super rich criminals who would have been getting a death sentence anyway starts out as an initially campy lighthearted game riffing on James Bond theatrics. But it evolves into a game about class conflict both in narrative and in mechanics. One with a story that finally explains just why so many online assassination contracts were floating around in Hitman 2016's world of assassination in the first place. Though again, there's still that harsh line between ideas and execution here. The minutiae of Hitman's plot is so thick with cloak and dagger euphemisms that even most Metal Gears are easier to figure out. And in Hitman 2, the budget for facial animation capture apparently had to be cut, leading to story cutscenes of statuesque characters talking at each other with disembodied voices and dialogue that has been cheesed up to account for that. The cheese never goes away, and costumes and characters stay silly, but the story gradually reaches disturbing places ripped from today's most disturbing headlines. The Hitman games have historically been darker and more sinister in tone, but the discomfort still hasn't gone away from this one. And one more final note. They are beginning to experiment with multiplayer modes. The included Ghost mode is an asynchronous 1v1 speedrunning competition where you and a friend race to assassinate some randomly decided targets as fast as possible in two different instances of the same level, with a limited stock of distraction items being used to lure NPCs towards the other player across your connection. And like a lot of multiplayer stealth games, I see it burning bright but not lasting long. The fun here comes from doing these assassinations as fast as possible, creating these chaotic fiascos you don't often see during the peace and quiet of single-player sessions, but without enough dynamic and unpredictable elements crossing the border between the two players' worlds, it's easy to see optimal strategies develop fast, making every session play the same. Right now, Ghost Mode is available for just the Miami racetrack level. Supposedly there will be more added soon, and when that happens, I will delightfully gladly play each level once, twice, and maybe even thrice, but don't know how many more past that. I mean, I may be a bit lukewarm concluding my thoughts on Ghost Mode here, but that's really just one more mode in a mountain of modes that are dedicated to making it as fun as possible to replay these 10 levels over and over again. With the 5 levels in Hitman 2016 and the new 5 levels in Hitman 2 and the sudden wealth of options and continuity that appears when you glue both of them together, plus the extra bonus missions they've released that aren't considered part of either season, you can get a surprisingly good value out of this game too, if you know what to look for from the DLC menus. I greatly envy players who are about to go through this whole thing for the first time, but I do not envy players who don't hear the following advice. Listen up, this is important, okay? Don't bother with the silver and gold editions, those are season passes. The route I recommend new players to go is scanning an aggregator like cheapshark.com for a cheap Hitman 2 code instead of starting with Hitman 2016. Then, on Steam, you're going to want Hitman 2 Game of the Year Legacy Pack, which includes all of the Season 1 missions plus the bonus DLCs. Note, this is not the Game of the Year Legacy Pack upgrade, which is for previous customers who don't have the Season 1 DLC. So going this route can bring your total up to $67-ish for new players who want to go through everything, but if you already have Season 1, it's possible to get to that level for like $47-ish. And if you think you're in either of those two camps, then please, seriously consider it. If you're a fan of the games I'm a fan of, if my tastes as a reviewer mirror yours, then this should be a no-brainer. This is a stealth game fan's stealth game. Hitman is cool for a lot of the same reasons Metal Gear is cool. It's mind-boggling how many of my own particular itches this game manages to scratch, and what a good job it does doing that. It's suffering commercially from marketing, from naming, from DRM schemes, from DLC schemes, to this half-baked always online component. I mean, I had to talk my way through a flowchart of which versions to buy, but the content itself is excellent. I'm already pretty sure this is my game of the year, but years in the future I wonder if the total experience of both new Hitmans put together will become a contender for Game of the Generation.